Hi, welcome to another installment of the intermittent series Heart and Craft, where I talk to independent artists about how they sustain their craft. I think all independent artists, no matter what their medium, share similar obstacles, and I think sharing our stories about how we overcome those obstacles individually, we can maybe pool that knowledge and forge a better future ahead together. This time I'm talking to multimedia artist Aaron Wood. He works in lots of physical media, sculpture, paint, pen, and ink. Stained glass is part of his craft. He doesn't own a computer though, which was a big surprise to me. So via his wife's iPad, we were able to record this interview. I find the motivations behind his art fascinating, and hopefully you will find his story fascinating too. Please enjoy, Aaron Wood.
Yeah.
So, Aaron Wood, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time. You are, as we've discussed often, an artist with an eclectic palette. Sounds like you. I knew you when I first started talking to you about your art that you did stained glass, but you have a much broader background than that.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you got into why you became an artist?
Uh,
That's a
well,
stupidly
I'm
wide.
I'm I'm a
That's a
child.
big question.
Big question. Well, I'd say, I mean, if you go back far enough, the reason why I got into art was probably because of comic books, see Star Wars. Um, and the older I've gotten, it hasn't really strayed much from that at all. I and and then and then later on, you get as you turn into a teenager, things like skateboarding and music. Uh, like CD, like well, before CDs, cassette tape and album covers and punk rock things that look DIY and done by hand start to infect your work. So just like kind of a lot of Gen X people born in the 70s and earlier people, my artwork desire to make artwork was just because it was everywhere. It was all
I mean,
over
were
everything
were
that
your
I
parents
liked.
artistic?
And yeah, my that's the thing is originally my parents were pretty hippie like, and when I was bored, they would just shove a art supplies into my hand. My mom was really a big artist, and she did in my house growing up, we had a lot of like rock posters and a lot of student artwork from hippie like people. So there'd be ceramic clay sculptures all over the house that were shaped very psychedelic. There'd be like a vase with like a vases were usually bent and turned downward like a elephant's trunk. It didn't, the things like that were obviously done by 1970s pot smoking youths. Um, so this just my whole household at the time was just this world of like rock posters mixed with the smell of pot smoke, classic paintings and spices and just like everything that a DIY communal living sort of hippie would do. So everything was handmade in my house, made out of wood or ceramic or so that upbringing was very inspirational.
So, I mean, did you?
Yeah.
How much art did you do in high school?
Well, then
I mean, did you do it like as it was it
my
something you studied? Because I mean, I know you was like more of like a DIY guy. Did you were you formally trained at any point?
yes, as well in high school I we had a teacher called Mrs. Knowles who was she basically was a very good way to learn because she basically you're in Florida and the school had a very small art program, but we had a graphic department across the street, across the hall,
Mm-hmm.
that allowed you to do silk screens with Ruby lift. So I learned silk screening pretty early, and they had also like letter presses and things like that. And then in Miss Knowles' class, which was known as the standard art class, basically the bell would ring and you could draw all day. There were no rules. She'd set up a still life, but some kids would do the still life, but most of us would draw whatever we
Mm-hmm.
wanted. And when I was a kid, a lot of the students were already pretty advanced drawers. So there was people drawing, you know, comic book looking artwork like Aliens or Simon Bisley or that
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. And then there are other kids that were doing surf logos and skateboarding logos. So I felt like I plopped right down the middle of all these very talented kids that were doing various forms of art, pretty advanced, which I thought was the upside of a teacher that was so open-minded that they allowed the students and gave the students good grades while doing exactly what they wanted to do. The only thing is you had to finish things. At the end of the semester, you had to have a folder full of artwork that was finished. You couldn't have like half-done things.
So like creating
So
it's a portfolio class sort of.
it's like a portfolios class in a way, and could be anything. And just a very open-minded, cool teacher. And so there's a lot of materials that she would bring in herself. I think she must have been independently wealthy. Besides her, I think she must have had like a husband who helped her to have good enough income to bring in materials, because we had like beads and old mops and wood, and so there's like an assemblage thing happening in there as well. And so that was probably the beginning of a formal art training. Of that was seeing these kids that were already really talented, and having a teacher that was cool enough to let these like really punk rock looking wild kids do what they want.
I mean, yeah.
But it also was intimidating.
Intimidating?
Yeah, they were. I mean, it's hard to describe, but these kids, and even to this day, these same people are really talented artists to this day. And when I came in there, I thought I was a good artist because I had been copying the drawings of at the time for me it was purely skateboarding, really, which was kind of, I'd say that was more sophomoric than what they were doing. I was replicating skateboard graphic ideas, which is very graphic. But that set me apart a little bit. But the other kids some were doing abstract art, some were doing extremely detailed stuff that you would see like an Simon Bisley drawing, or like a Frank Frazetta style.
Yeah.
And so that intimidated me. I was sitting in class because the classes in some cases were multi-age groups. There'd be seniors and freshmen in the same class.
So was it just like their mastery of like the materials that you hadn't necessarily worked with yet, that kind of thing? Because like Frazetta and Bisley were very painterly.
Yeah, they were using, at the time, they were using oil pastels.
Right.
Which,
my dad dabbled with that stuff.
Yeah, it's like a very, very beginner's art medium. But if you push that medium enough, you'll get some detail, and they were pushing it quite a bit. I'd say most students were mixing acrylic with oil pastels, so they were putting an acrylic wash down, and then they're detailing it to death with the oil pastel later. And I don't know where these kids got their mastery or where they got, but it seems to be that these kids who later became my friends had like a competitive thing going between each other. They were competing for who the best artist would be. And some were clean cut, some were like punk rock, and it's just going to a high school, and then seeing punk rockers and these kids for the first time and wanting to fit in with them and being the young guy. And I say it's intimidating in that they were older and more talented. So I was used to being like one of the only artists in like middle school, like junior high. I was one of very few, and I was actually pretty good at drawing. I used to draw skater stuff, usually pen and ink, some funky stuff, whatever. And these older guys liked what I was doing, but I was a lot more ragtag and cartoony than they were. And but they accepted me into the group. But like I said before in earlier conversations we've had, I got really into writing because I figured like I can't compete here, so I need to like become a writer. So I started doing these these magazines. I would make like these like magazines by going to like a Kinko's and printing out a lot of Xeroxes, stapling them together or binding them together, and I would draw my terrible cartoony drawing style, but I would write a lot of writing with it. And those became kind of popular. I would hand them out, and I would make money off them.
I mean, zines are kind of a cornerstone of punk culture, aren't they? I mean, from way back.
Yes, I was really raised on zines because zines were always for sale or for free at all the record shops. And I already been going to record shops, even as far back as 6th grade or earlier. So I felt like I was the only one really truly doing that in that particular school. So that's kind of what set me apart. So it kind of led me into doing like a multimedia approach then, which was writing and drawing at the same time, and creating a semblance of that skill.
I wanna jump
Um,
ahead a bit because after many misadventures, you finally go to college, right? You go to art school.
yeah.
Was it like it was a proper art school? It wasn't like an art department in another general
So
arts.
I went to enroll at University of Cincinnati, and too expensive. So I re-enrolled at Northern Kentucky University,
Okay.
which the only person that's of any worth that's come out of there, George Clooney, and who dropped out one credit shy of graduating. Um, Literally one class away, but he moved to Hollywood, you know.
Okay.
Um, so anyway, that was like a well-known thing. But the thing that was fascinating about this school is it was built in the '60s and very brutalist architecture, and especially the ceramics department was built in this like '60s style of like a long studio space with a breathe like that opens up on both sides. So there's garage doors on two sides, like it's just a long like hallway of buildings outside, separated from any main building. That you could open up two garage doors on either side and let air go through it. So it's kind of I would say that this college is actually has no worth as far as like you're not going to get a job because you went to this college. But at the time that I went, the teachers seemed to be from like this older era, and they were doing a lot of it did seem kind of hippie like. It was like the things that they were teaching were old school. I went in as a graphic design major to learn with computers, but this was but I would say I took about the most minimal computer classes I could, and went ahead, and I shouldn't have enrolled as that. I should have enrolled as a studio artist of some sort, because I took every single class you could take in arts there, to try to like get rid of electives. I went overboard. There's a lot of classes that didn't even count. I started to screw up because I got too excited and just kept taking drawing classes, printmaking classes. So I got a really, really rounded education at this college by taking classes I didn't need. And they had an incredible selection of printing presses, silk screening equipment, photography equipment, sculpture classes, clay, various ceramic classes, wheel throwing and hand slab building and everything.
The faculty must have got to know you really well then.
Yeah, oh yeah. I was I was an older student,
right.
and they a lot of times my teachers were my age as well, so they didn't really know what to do with me for a long time, because I argued with them quite a bit. I wanted to know how to make money as an artist. That was all I wanted to know. I already knew how to do artwork at this point, so I enrolled in college already with a pretty like confident hand in artwork. I'd already done like art shows. I'd already done designed some skateboarding graphics for just like smaller companies and things. So I kind of went there a little bit.
You done art shows before you got to art school. What were your shows?
Yeah.
What were you exhibiting? Was your skateboard art?
Mostly paintings. Originally, I used to do like acrylic paintings, just small like shows, like in small towns, Florida, and already in Cincinnati. Whenever someone would do there'd be a show for open entry to whoever I would join. I already considered myself.
All right. So it wasn't like it wasn't like some gallery that like sponsors you or something. It was, but
no, it's just I had the confidence in me already to, just being. Whenever I'd go to town, I would join whatever skateboarding culture was there, or whatever local culture was there. So any little art show in a coffee shop or whatever I had already done. There's nothing big. It was just.
But still, like you wanted your stuff to be seen, and that's more than a lot of people.
I had a confidence. I knew I had a story. Yeah, I had a story and a style that I felt like was mine already. So when I went into college, the teachers were frustrated with me because I would, instead of learning from zero, I'd learn from about the middle. They would say, we don't know where you're getting this style from, but who are you copying, and sort of that sort of thing. I guess it's not very common to go into like a freshman art class and like develop style, and that's done somewhat strongly confidently, and then have them kind of pick it apart. And say like, what is this? Who are you copying? Who are your influences? They kind of don't want you to start from there. They kind of want to. This is what I had a problem with, and I think a lot of people do too. Is they kind of want to erase your childlike tendencies. They want you to start from scratch and learn fine art from the classical sense.
Right.
There was a strong classical training.
So do you think though that so you went into school specifically to find out how to monetize your art? Do you think on some level this classical approach was what they were trying to tell you? Like you got to be a classicist to be able to make money? Is that what they were saying?
Yeah, because I think at the time artwork wasn't like today. So this is we're only going back to around the year 2000, and even in that era, even though there were an underground movement of artists that were like graffiti and skateboarding artists and just gallery artists out there that were already successful, the art teachers necessarily weren't fully aware of anything countercultural at the time. So their opinion of art, no matter how cool they were, how hip they were in the 70s or 80s that got them to that point, they were fully indebted to Cincinnati's art world at that time, which was a lot of the art museums and the art shows before the Contemporary Arts Center was built there were built upon a classical art style.
Right.
Cincinnati had an aesthetic. It had so if you're a newspaper illustrator, even, you had a classical style that was. So it was interesting, actually. I can appreciate it. So like an illustrator, one of the famous illustrators in that town, which I can't recall his name, actually does a very painterly illustration style that he builds up many, many layers, and it looks like something you would see in like a 1800s ad or something. It's very classical. And so for them to show at the Carnegie or any of these sort of like big name galleries, you kind of had to be a landscape artist or a portrait artist. The people with money in that city only bought that sort of artwork at the time.
But you weren't interested in changing your style to fit the market. I would imagine.
I wasn't. So So I personally fought tooth and nail the entire time with all projects, and succeeded. Actually, I have a few teachers that are enemies, but it only took a while. I really feel like I didn't really learn anything from college. I just learned. I just experimented with the tools.
Right.
It was a place to there's a printing press, and they teach you the basics, and then I do what I want, and then I turn that project in, and instead of printing in one thing, I'll turn in like 8 things, and then they would say well, you didn't do the project as we prescribed it, but you did a lot of work, and it's finished looking work, so we'll give you an A. So that was my method for the entire time, and I spent 9 years in there because I had so many, ups and downs.
Well, also this notion, because I did a similar thing in film school. I mean, because I changed my major a couple of times, whatever, and then somebody said, and so I had to make the catalog fit. And a friend of mine said, just take the classes you want. Who cares what the catalog is? So I ended up staying five years, so not as long as you, because it's a really expensive major. But it was the same thing. I took a bunch of classes. A really well-rounded education, and it was great for me. And it's atypical. So people look, and I was an older student as well. So people look at me like, "Why are you still here? You're an old man." And I'm like,
right.
Education, man. So you graduate, and what is your first foray into? Well, I'm assuming you graduate, but you finish studying, and then you how do you start making money doing art, or do you?
I don't. I've never made a lot of money doing art. So. I've always made art, and I've always shown art, but I still have not made a living from art. But that maybe one day. But I've done a lot though. When I graduated, at the time Cincinnati had a very they had a street that went right through downtown that became excuse me, an art district. So I became like a pretty successful Cincinnati, Ohio artist because there became like this little art district that started because the area went through a lot of changes, and a lot of people left the city, and it started to get gentrified, say, but with coffee shops, and just a classic tale of the city emptying out, and then a lot of artists moving into cheap
Right.
spaces. But for a little while there was a pretty successful scene that looked like it just like any other scene in the country, where there are coffee shops, concert venues, art galleries, studios, all on the same street, and you could do like a monthly art walk and walk down the street and see multiple
There's one every
shows.
month. That's
Uh,
because the town I was
yeah,
first moved to the States had one every year.
yeah, we had it. It was called the Final Friday.
Nice.
So I quickly moved into doing art shows every single Final Friday. I did one each month for a year when I graduated before I moved to New
Mm.
York. Um, Sometimes I did one that was purely devoted to a streetcar going into the city. So I did a poster show advocating for the streetcar. It was like a Cincinnati has a very poor transportation system, so they wanted to put in like a trolley
Right.
car. And they did. They successfully did, but at the time they were looking for anybody to try to advertise for it. And so I did
Mhm.
that. The mayor came and so on. I've done shows where I've released skateboard designs for myself and others. Um, I've done group shows where I've put together a show with people that I liked. So I had people that were underappreciated in the city I would show, including I had a show with an artist from Florida that I grew up with and hitchhiked with. Also had a local uh, artist that does like murals around the city, a
Yeah.
muralist. And then I had a homeless man that draws on cardboard, who everyone saw as a fixture, but he never had a show, but he was good enough for a show. A man that's older there, that's from San Francisco, that was a contemporary of R. Crumb, whose name's Justin Green, who I just discovered that had moved to Cincinnati, but he is from the original like early comic book era in the
Oh,
'60s. So he
the
was
Silver Age.
Justin Green. Yeah, he did a comic called Dickie Brown versus the Holy Virgin Mary thing. And he was Charles Bukowski's worst enemy. They were enemies. Charles Bukowski wrote a piece about him. He has a long story about how much he hates Justin Green.
Wow, that's so
Uh,
specific.
yeah. So I met this guy at a coffee shop. I recognized somebody who kept saying, "Oh, this weird guy comes in here." He's a comic book artist from the '60s. Everyone's like, "He's really weird." So I saw him. They said, "Oh, there he is over there." Okay, I walked over to him and introduced myself, and we struck up a friendship. He passed away a couple years ago, um, but he became a best friend. His wife had cancer. He called me, and I sat with him in the hospital where he waited for his wife. And got really close with this guy, but I put a show on for him, and uh, excuse me, he I did a show with him, and I just did stuff like that. Excuse me, I'm choking to death.
No, I'm sorry. We could take a break if you need. It's fine.
Um, I don't know. I just did a lot of shows there, and I feel like I had a lot more success there because the city is cheap,
What?
so I could
I mean, like,
afford.
so overhead's an issue everywhere, but there's also like, I mean, the community. I mean, when you, as an artist, left this thriving, it sounds like, or certainly active community, did your work
Yeah.
suffer, or certainly were you less prolific?
No, my work increased because I came here and felt the pressure of New York City and met a lot of more interesting people. But it is a lot harder to get a show here. But it's also because I never truly tried. What happened here, when I started working a lot and I started making a lot of money. When I first moved here, I made a ton of money by just accepting jobs in the bar and restaurant world.
All right, so
Uh,
yes, so not art jobs. You were service industry stuff.
Yeah, because I had tried out for art jobs here. I'd gotten a few jobs. I'd gotten a job at working for a photographer doing his layouts for him, and I didn't like it. I just didn't like anything about it. So
You don't strike me as an
got
assistant.
some bar work. Yeah, I was just like an artist
Yeah.
assistant, and I did do some set building work where that's artistic as well, where they utilized my painting skills and woodworking skills and things. But none of those things are very gratifying. I felt like New York was a place that kind of grinded the art down to like a job.
Right.
And so I entered bartending, which I could work 3 days a week and make a lot of money. So really my art like quality increased by tenfold. I got way more detailed. I went way bigger, but it had no place to put it. Like the gallery, and to this day I've done a lot of artwork. So I feel like I thrived better in Cincinnati because there's like instant access to galleries that were smaller, but there was like a clear pathway to success there. Where New York, it's just a different market, So what I've learned to do is I've learned to do like jobs, like like set building kind of jobs, like building shapes and things for people to like pedestals and things for people to show their work on. And I've done stained glass work, which that came from Cincinnati too. Since I was doing so many art shows in Cincinnati as a painter, uh, uh, stained glass artist saw my work and was inspired by it and asked me if I wanted to learn at a real studio and then enter an art show with this stained glass, which I did. And it took a month to create a big stained glass window. But I learned from like a very professional studio who had learned in, I guess the owner of it was an older man who'd learned in Italy, which I think to this day is still probably one of the main places for like, really classical style stained glass and even the creation of the glass and where they make the glass itself is done in a lot of it's done in Italy still. But that's how I learned that is it was through my use of color and like I used to be a really colorful painter. They thought it would translate, and so I lucked out and was probably my last year of college. I also was going in after school to this studio to work all night long. And luckily learned the correct way. So I learned the actual classical way of doing stained glass windows, not the hobbyist way. So it allowed me to for a while, and since in New York City in the beginning of moving here, I was putting stained glass windows into a few bars, repairing windows for people. There's only a couple people that knew how to do this for a while. And so that's how that worked out.
But I mean, it's interesting. The thread through this conversation is sort of like, well, for me, community. I mean, it used to be that like Brooklyn was like where artists used to live, Greenpoint, because it was cheap, and now it's not. I mean, do you think there's like is there any place cheap enough in the greater New York area for artists to have a place?
I feel like people have joined together in like these little groups. I know a lot of co-students have finally moved here, so I moved here first for my generation of people. So these would be kids that are younger than me. They started to show up here around the time of the pandemic, and I was kind of shocked to see them. Some of them came here for graduate school, but it seems to me that there are like these little art clubs that pop up where they'll have a little gallery, or they get into like the graduate programs and they don't necessarily show in New York. They show worldwide, nationwide, but they seem to work small in their apartments. Yeah. So it's still like, to me, it's limiting. It's like there's a lot less work being done here. There's a lot less studio space. They say that I haven't had a success in New York. It's not entirely true. When I got here, I had friends from all the way back to Florida who were artists who had moved here, didn't go to art school, but had just dived into the art world here when it was still cheap, which would have been late 90s. Right. So I came here 10 years too late. So when I first arrived here, I had several friends that worked in Dumbo, and they had studios there and would make various things. They would either do ceramic, like some did ceramic work where they would make, but it seemed to be very much, the interesting thing about New York was it was very much based around a sellable product. Right. So they were an artist, they were printing their artwork onto things. So it'd be like a lampshade or something, and they would make the bases out of ceramic and have them molded somewhere. So each art studio that I saw was, even if it's the graphic skateboard artist, there was one that did wood cutting, and they'd print their woodcut graphics onto paper and then scan it and then ship that to a skate company. But it seemed like it was always commerce.
I mean,
which is a
I mean,
learning
there's something
experience.
really Warhol about that. There's something like that. It's just sort of embraces the commercial part of it. I mean, it isn't, but I mean, for
Yeah,
somebody who went to art school to find a way to monetize, was that a revelation to you? Was that abhorrent? What was your take on that?
it was a revelation, but it's also yeah. I mean, but at the same time, I haven't always agreed with it. I don't think it doesn't. I could have dived right in. I could have done something similar, but it doesn't really get me going. My wife's an interior designer, and that perspective of the art world that's sort of like the engineer or designer's
Right.
perspective, and it is very Warhol-like in a way, but it's so professionalized that it takes money to make money. It seems to be you can't start from scratch. It's like you have to start with a bit of like a investment,
Right.
you know, and then you start this like very calculated, you know, collection of things, whether it's lighting or furniture and it's always an object that's utilitarian
Well, I mean,
that
it
gets
sounds like a
created.
business plan. Like you have to be able to show that
Yeah,
this thing will sell based on other market forces compared to other
right.
lamps. We expect to sell X, and and with that profit, we'll
Yeah,
build
and
Y.
I feel like so the world of the illustrator or the drawer or something. The only successes I've had has been every show that I've done. I've kind of stood out where the artwork other people seem to have been from out of town. I feel like a New York art show has got a lot of out of towners in the shows, and they're sponsored by somebody. Like they got like a beer sponsorship or something, and they're there, and they seem to gravitate towards my work. And the first question I've always got is, who are you sponsored by, or who are you endorsed by? And often I'm like, nobody. I'm not endorsed by anybody. Um, but it just always has given me like a sour taste. So like I think what I've just learned to do here is just to keep pumping out artwork still for
Mhm.
myself and collect it. I've kind of been a collector of my own work. But I've already done art shows. I did a decade of art shows in Cincinnati, so I know how to put on an art show and know how to, you know, produce an art
Right.
show. I just haven't. I feel like the gallery world here is quite a bit different. It used to be Bushwick had a lot of little galleries, and there's many chances I've had to show there, but I never really truly liked the other artists' work in the show. So,
And even the Bushwick scene's changed radically since I moved to Brooklyn, just in the
yeah,
last 10 years. It's a completely different place.
yeah, it's not as accessible. It's not as
No,
accessible as it
yeah, you
was.
got to have a car.
So,
So I mean,
yeah, yeah.
at this point, I generally ask people if you had your druthers, if you could have had different circumstances in the last 10 years, say, what would they be? What would facilitate your art, um, for you?
Well, I've realized that I don't necessarily need New York City to be an artist. I felt like New York City was a place for me to go to like sharpen my craft and learn about how to make money as an artist. But I find it too distracting in a way. Um, I feel like the answer at this point is a smaller city that still has an art community. And then if you want to do a show in New York City or something, you could just come here and do the show. I feel like you actually, for me personally, I'm feeling like if I wasn't going to leave the city altogether for another coast or another town, which I probably
Mm.
will, it would be just to live upstate somewhere, which is what a lot of artists have done that I like.
And
So,
the sustainability that you've achieved through part time work, that works for you. It seems to be liberating in some way.
that's just that's first. I don't want to do that forever. I think my life goal is to be a working artist that makes artwork and even make objects for people for money. But I think uh, that's always been like something that's been a crux. I feel like for some strange reason, if I work in the arts, it takes the joy out of the art for me
Right.
personally. I've done it several. No, I've always have the hardest time with a project. I am a working artist in that I do get projects. I get stained glass projects. I get illustration projects. I've done shirts for people, skateboards for people. But every time it's a stressful game because, I mean, and that's part of the challenge. I guess that's what it is. You have to learn how to work with other people. But I've always felt that the work that I like to see, that I want to show, comes best when I can be in a job that is some sort of monotonous hand, work with your hands sort of job that allows your mind to wander, where I actually get ideas from being bored at this job. The ideas kind of fade away when I work in the arts. I start to lose interest in art. So that's just personally been my problem. So that's a lifelong problem that I've never solved. But, that's kind of the lifestyle I lead. I work some job that's very mundane and go home and make some drawings, wild drawings.
Yeah. Well, it's like, the whole Magritte thing. He dressed in a boring way so he could be fantastic in his art. It's,
right.
Yeah. Well, I got what I wanted out of this. Do you have anything that's come to mind to the conversation that you want to add?
So the whole point of this conversation was to talk about art.
Well, it's about. So I mean, is independent art sustainable? Is the big question. And you found a way to make it work for you while you're in New York, but you, like you said, you're moving, presumably to a place with like a more vibrant art community.
Right.
I mean, is your art part of that decision? I mean, that's
part of my decision, where I think it might lead me to teaching or something. Like, I think ultimately we'll find a job in the arts. That's the goal. Whether I go back to school for graduate studies or I try to find a place where I could teach printmaking or ceramics or something, or drawing or whatever. But yeah, I think I visited other towns that seem to operate the way that Cincinnati was operating, which, if I had to guess, Cincinnati doesn't even operate this way anymore. But it makes you wonder, like, is art viable? Is handmade art viable?
right.
Is there, or has designers of various forms, whether it's interior designs or mostly interior designs, or fashion design, or even film production, is that the new art style of the moment? Because sure, there's a lot of painters and there are artists. There's still an art show every year at the various art festivals around the country. So obviously art is being made. But how is it being made? Who are these people? Like, are they making a living doing this? Or is the bigger picture right now is the more exciting artwork being made for people's dwellings, for interior design people? Because what I'm noticing is that the speed of time between the idea of the artist and the finished product and how it interacts with the world is a lot faster in the design world now. So they come up with an idea for a painting. Even. It could be a two-dimensional drawing, and they'll hire an artist to do this drawing, and then it's done in a month, and then it's hanging in somebody's fancy home or hotel immediately. This gets immediate gratification, and people get paid. So I feel like the new art way is very commodified, and it's a team now. It's a team effort, and there's usually somebody with a lot of money at the head of it who didn't necessarily get trained to do what they do. It's like there's like taste maker,
but that's
like somebody owns a thing that's a taste. He has a taste.
So then somebody's painting is like is an accent to a larger room. So the art is the room.
Yeah, it's like a decorative. Yeah. Like, I think we've got point where artists in the in like the big painting era of Soho, where they could make things, some of them would scoff at the idea of art being decorative,
right?
But then at the same time they were making artwork that would fit into people's homes. So clearly the best paintings were still decorative, even when they were attempting not to be.
It does seem like a flip, though. Like, someone would buy a massive piece of art and then like decorate the room to go with the art, and now like they're decorating the room and then making art to fit the decor. So it does sound like a
because
reversal.
The decor. Yeah, I mean, that I find that this is the at least right now in 2023 and probably 10 years before it, to me, it seems like in the United States anyway, the big art form is decorating spaces for people who have the money. And so every single ingredient of this design now is whether it's the handles on the doors to the paint color, or even like inventing paint colors or types of flooring, and like all these sort of things are that's become the only purpose of art, the strongest purpose of art that I've seen, you know. So it makes you wonder, like, what's the point? Did you have to get into this world and start, you know, if you need to rub shoulders with designers? Or can you purely be a studio artist that shows in a museum setting purely? That's a good question. And I think that's the question that I've had to deal with for the last decade.
I mean, that
that
really is like the question I'm exploring with these conversations, because I don't want to believe that the world has to have or top-down organizations that facilitate art. But that was a pretty bleak view you just gave me there, and it's I see it everywhere, you know. So it's not like it's an unusual point of view. I'm just hoping that the more I talk to people, the more I'll find a way of finding a way where that's not the case. But you know, it's hard for everybody.
Well, I'm speaking. Yeah, well, I'm speaking from the perspective of an artist so I guess a part of me does like that world in a way where I'm so if you ask what my art practice is, it as much as I like to use my own imagination, it's been a process of creating things that do look good in a home. Really, it'd be sculptural furniture. I've really been excited for the last few years with the artists from like the golden eras of design, like the Bauhaus era and so on, where things were made by hand, and I think that a lot of people are as well. Obviously, I'm not the only one. There's a lot of artists that are really based around that real hands-on craftsmanship, or arts and crafts, or Bauhaus, or any of these movements that came from an era where things had to be done by hand, like moldings and.
Excuse me.
But then there, of course, that's why I'm so fixated personally on how do I sell this stuff? Like, who am I making this for? This is for me, and do I need a studio? It sounds like I need a studio with a workshop. And where do you live where you can afford these things? But also, on the other hand, there are other art forms, and video game artists. There's filmmaker people. There's comic book art still to this day. There's people that design book covers. There's graphic designers that design the products, and that's also the thing, is that the art world has expanded so dramatically that there's millions of artists all around the world that you're competing with, and it's hard to say which one is the most important thing in reality. Is it this design that I'm looking at that seems to start to fall into a black hole of interior design, or is it if you go left a whole different direction, do I start making comic books, and comic book artists become like this infinite black hole of millions of artists that are part of a select few companies who make these things? So it just depends. And, I think that's where my brain is kind of split. There is a part of me that could decide maybe I'll start designing books or comics or something like that, and get out of this world of designing objects, big paintings that take up space. If you do a big painting, our sculpture has to go somewhere. But yeah, it's bleak because of the sheer number of art students that are out there, and what's going to happen when it goes AI and you start designing for Meta, and it's going to be like that world's going to be a new art forum too, like a virtual art gallery setting, So I don't know if that screws up this conversation completely.
I have no idea. That's the beauty of it. This is there are no answers, but there are lots of great questions. Anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up there because I could talk to you all day. But Thank you very much, Aaron. This has been great. Appreciate it.
No problem.